For the next 28 minutes, the subject remained semi-comatose. At 11:48, responses to painful stimuli were slightly improved. At 11:55, he was helped to a sitting position. At 1200, he became shocky again and was returned to supine position. At 12:12, he was more alert and was able to sit up with help. At 12:20, subject was assisted to the interrogation table. At 12:30, he began moaning he wanted to die and usually ignored questions. Rarely he stated, quote, he didn't know, end quote. At 12:50, his phasic alertness persisted. He frequently refocused his eyes with eyelid assistance. He frequently threw his head back with eyes closed. At 13:30, he was slightly more alert. He was forced walked for 5 minutes. He physically would cooperate until he became shocky again. Sweaty, thready pulse, pale. Footnote 113. For the next 3 hours, the subject remained in about the same condition. Continued attempts at interrogation yielded no relevant answers. 6 hours after receiving the drug, the subject began giving relevant answers to questions. 8½ hours after the initial dosage, the subject was polygraphed. The interrogation continued for 17½ hours after the drug was administered. There was some psychological and medical screening of the individuals tested within the United States, in Europe, and in Asia. The proposal for the field experimentation, in fact, called for such examinations. The fact of pre-screening did not eliminate the risk of injury. The availability of medical staff did, however, limit injury and may well have prevented the death of one or more of the subjects. As the medical corps member of the team which surreptitiously administered LSD noted, quote, one subject did collapse after the interrogation, and the presence of the medical officer was not only of value to the subject but to the interrogation team, who were thus assured that an unnecessary untoward result would not occur, end quote. Footnote 115. Just a brief comment, it looks like there is no 114. Proceeding onward. In the October 15, 1959 USA INTC staff study, Moral and Legal Ramifications of Covert Administration of LSD in Field Conditions were considered. It was always a tenet of Army intelligence that the basic American principle of the dignity and welfare of the individual will not be violated. A more meticulous regard for the prohibition against violence or duress is taken in practice when the suspect is a U.S. citizen or ally as against an actual or potential enemy, in peace as against war, in respect to the nature of the crime. In intelligence, the stakes involved and the interests of national security may permit a more tolerant interpretation of moral ethical values, but not legal limits through necessity. Any claim, the end of page 99, the beginning of page 100, against the U.S. government for alleged injury due to EA 1729 must be legally shown to have been due to the material. Proper security and appropriate operational techniques can protect the fact of employment of EA 1729. Footnote 116. Returning to page 99 to read the footnotes. Footnote 113, IBID, page D10-3. Footnote 115, SPT Trip Report, Operation Third Chance, July 25th, 61, page 1. Resuming page 100. On the basis of this evaluation, the study concluded that, in view of, quote, the stakes involved and the interests of national security, end quote, a proposed plan for field testing should be approved. The surreptitious administration of drugs to unwitting subjects by the Army raises serious constitutional and legal issues. The consideration given these issues by the Army was wholly insufficient. The character of the Army's volunteer testing program and the possibility that drugs were simply substituted for other forms of violence or duress in field interrogations raises serious doubts as to whether national security imperatives were properly interpreted. The quote consent end quote forms which each American volunteer signed prior to the administration of LSD are a case in point. These forms contained no mention of the medical and psychological risks inherent in such testing, nor do they mention the nature of the psychotropic drug to be administered. The general nature of the experiments in which I have volunteered have been explained to me from the standpoint of possible hazards to my health. It is my understanding that the experiments are so designed based on the results of animals and previous human experimentation, that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. I understand further that experiments will be conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury, that I will be at liberty to request that the experiments be terminated at any time if, in my opinion, I have reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiments becomes undesirable. I recognize that in the pursuit of certain experiments, transitory discomfort may occur. I recognize also that under these circumstances, I must rely upon the skill and wisdom of the physician supervising the experiment to institute whatever medical or surgical measures are indicated. Emphasis added. Footnote 118. The exclusion of any specific discussion of the nature of LSD in these forms raises serious doubts as to their validity, and, quote, understanding that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment, end quote, without full knowledge of the nature of the experiment is an incomplete, quote, understanding, end quote. Similarly, the nature of the experiment is the nature of the experiment limited the ability of both the subject to request its termination, and the experimenter to implement such a request. Finally, the euphemistic characterization of, quote, transitory discomfort, end quote, and the agreement to, quote, rely on the skill and wisdom of the physician, end quote, combine to conceal inherent risks in the experimentation and may be viewed as dissolving the experimenter of personal responsibility for damaging after effects. In summary, a quote, volunteer, end quote, program in which subjects are not fully informed of potential hazards to their persons is, quote, volunteer, end quote, in name only. Reading the footnotes. Footnote Let me see, 116. USA INTC staff study. Quote, material testing program EA 1729, end quote. October 15th, 59, page 26. Footnote 118. Looks like 117 isn't there. Sample volunteer consent form. End of page 100, beginning of page 101. One moment. Resuming page 101. This problem was compounded by the security statements signed by each volunteer before he participated in the testing. As part of this statement, potential subjects agreed that they would not divulge or make available any information related to U.S. Army Intelligence Center interest or participation in the Department of the Army Medical Research Volunteer Program to any individual, nation, organization, business, association, or other group or entity not officially authorized to receive such information. I understand that any action contrary to the provisions of this statement will render me liable to punishment under the provision of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, footnote 119. Under these provisions, a volunteer experiencing after effects of the test might have been unable to seek immediate medical assistance. This disregard for the well-being of subjects drug testing is inexcusable. Further, the absence of any comprehensive, long-term medical assistance for the subjects of these experiments is not only unscientific, it is also unprofessional. 4. Lack of normal authorization and supervision. It is apparent from documents supplied to the committee that the Army's testing programs often operated under informal and non-routine authorization, potentially dangerous operations, such as these testing programs, are the very projects which ought to be subject to the closest internal scrutiny at the highest levels of the military command structure. There are numerous examples of inadequate review, partial consideration, and incomplete approval in the administration of these programs. When the first Army program to use LSD on American soldiers in, quote, field stations, end quote, was authorized in May 1955, the Army violated its own procedures in obtaining approval. Under Army Chief of Staff Memorandum 385, such proposals were to be personally approved by the Secretary of the Army. Although the plan was submitted to him on April 26, 1956, the Secretary issued no written authorization for the project, and there is no evidence that he either reviewed or approved the plan. Less than a month later, the Army Chief of Staff issued a memorandum authorizing the tests. Footnote 120. Subsequent testing of LSD under Material Testing Program EA 1729 operated generally under this authorization. When the plans for this testing were originally discussed in early 1958 by officials of the Army Intelligence Center at Fort Holabird and representatives of the Chemical Warfare Center at Edgewood Arsenal, an informal proposal was formulated. This proposal was submitted to the Medical Research Directorate at Edgewood by the President of the Army Intelligence Board on June 3, 1958. There is no evidence that the plan was approved at any level higher than the President of the Intelligence Board or Commanding General of Edgewood. The approval at Edgewood appears to have been issued by the Commander's adjutant. The medical research laboratories did not submit the plan to the Surgeon General for approval, a standard procedure. Because, end of page 101, beginning of page 102. The new program was ostensibly covered by the authorizations granted in May 1956. Footnote 121. Returning to page 101 to read the footnotes. Footnote 119. Sample Volunteer Security Statement. Footnote 120. Inspector General of the Army Report, quote, use of volunteers in chemical agent research, end quote. March 10th, 76, page 109. Returning to page 102. The two projects involving the operational use of LSD, Third Chance and Derby Hat, were apparently approved by the Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, General Willems, on December 7, 1960. Footnote 122. This verbal approval came in the course of a briefing on previous drug programs and on the planned field experimentation. There is no record of written approval being issued by the ACSI to authorize these specific projects until January 1961, and there is no record of any specific knowledge or approval by the Secretary of the Army. On February 4th, 1963, Major General C.F. Leonard, Army ACSI, forwarded a copy of the Third Chance Trip Report to Army Chief of Staff General Errol Wheeler. Footnote 123. Wheeler had apparently requested a copy on February 2nd. The report was routed through a General Hamlet. While this report included background on the origins of the LSD tests, it appears that General Wheeler may only have read the conclusion and recommendations. Footnote 124. The office memorandum accompanying the trip report bears Wheeler's initials. Footnote 125. Section 5. Termination of testing. On April 10, 1963, a briefing was held in the ACSI's office on the results of projects Third Chance and Derby Hat. Both SPTs conclude that more field testing was required before LSD could be utilized as an integral aid to counterintelligence interrogations. During the presentation of the Derby Hat results, General Leonard, Deputy ACSI, directed that no further field testing be undertaken. Footnote 126. After this meeting, the ACSI sent a letter to the Commanding General of the Army Combat Developments Command, CDC, requesting that he review Third Chance and Derby Hat and, quote, make a net evaluation concerning the adoption of EA 1729 for future use as an effective and profitable aid in counterintelligence interrogations, end quote. Footnote 127. On the same day, the ACSI requested that the CDC commander revise Regulation FM 330-17 to read in part, in no instance will drugs be used as an aid to interrogations, in counterintelligence or security operations, without prior permission of the Department of the Army. Requests to use drugs as an investigative aid will be forwarded through intelligence channels to the OACSI DA for approval. Medical research has established that information obtained through the use of these drugs is unreliable and invalid. It is considered that DA Army approval must be a prerequisite for use of such drugs because of the moral, legal, medical, and political problems inherent in their use for intelligence purposes. Footnote 128. Reading the footnotes. Footnote 121. IBID, pages 137, 135, and 138. Footnote 122. Mehovsky Fact Sheet, December 9th, 60. Footnote 123. Memorandum from Leonard to Wheeler, February 4th, 63. Footnote 124. SGS Memorandum to Wheeler through Hamlet, February 5th, 63. Footnote 125. IBID. Footnote 126. Major F. Barnett, Memorandum for the Record, August 12, 63. Footnote 127. Yamaki Memorandum for the Record, July 16, 63. Footnote 128. IBID. End of page 102, beginning of page 103. The subsequent adoption of this regulation marked the effective termination of field testing of LSD by the Army. The official termination date of these testing programs is rather unclear, but a later ACSI memo indicates that it may have occurred in September of 1963. On the 19th of that month, a meeting was held between Dr. Van Sims, Edgewood Arsenal, Major Clovis, Chemical Research Laboratory, and ACSI representatives, General Deholm and Colonel Schmidt. Quote, as a result of this conference, a determination was made to suspend the program and any further activity pending a more profitable and suitable use. Footnote 129. Section D. Cooperation and competition among the intelligence community agencies and between these agencies and other individuals and institutions. 1. Relationships among agencies within the intelligence community. Relationships among intelligence community agencies in this area varied considerably over time, ranging from full cooperation to intense and wasteful competition. The early period was marked by a high degree of cooperation among the agencies of the intelligence community. Although the military dominated research involving chemical and biological agents, the information developed was shared with the FBI and the CIA. But the spirit of cooperation did not continue. The failure by the military to share information apparently breached the spirit, if not the letter, of commands from above. As noted above, the Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence was briefed on the proposed operational testing of LSD under Project Third Chance, and expressed concern that the project had not been coordinated with FBI and CIA. Despite this request, no coordination was achieved between the Army and either of these agencies. Had such cooperation been forthcoming, this project may have been evaluated in a different light. The competition between the agencies in this area reached bizarre levels. A military officer told a CIA representative in confidence about the military's field testing of LSD in Europe under Project Third Chance, and the CIA's promptly attempted to learn surreptitiously the nature and extent of the program. At roughly the same time, Mr. Helms argued to the DDCI that the unwitting testing program should be continued as it contributes to the CIA's capability in the area, and thus the CIA, quote, to restrain others in the intelligence community, such as the Department of Defense, from pursuing operations, end quote. Footnote 130. The MK Naomi program was also marked by a failure to share information. The Army Special Forces, the principal customer of Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick, and the CIA, rather than attempting to coordinate their efforts, promulgated different requirements which varied only slightly. This apparently resulted in some duplication of effort. In order to ensure the security of CIA operations, the agency would request materials from SOD for operational use without fully or accurately describing the operational requirements. This resulted in limitations on SOD's ability to assist the CIA. Reading the footnotes. Footnote 129. Updated ASCI Memorandum, page 2. Footnote 130. Memorandum from the DDP to the DCI, November 9th, 64, page 2. The end of page 103, the beginning of page 104. One moment. Two. Relationships between the intelligence community, agencies, and foreign liaison services. The subjects of the CIA's operational testing of chemical and biological agents abroad were generally being held for interrogation by foreign intelligence or security organizations. Although information about the use of drugs was generally withheld from these organizations, cooperation with them necessarily jeopardized the security of CIA interest in these materials. Cooperation also placed the American government in a position of complicity in the actions which violated the rights of the subjects, and which may have violated the laws of the country in which the experiments took place. Cooperation between the intelligence agencies and organizations in foreign countries was not limited to relationships with the intelligence or internal security organizations. Some MKUltra research was conducted abroad. While this is in itself not a questionable practice, it is important that such research abroad not be undertaken to evade American laws. This was a possibility is suggested by an artichoke memorandum, in which it is noted that working with the scientists of a foreign country, quote, might be very advantageous, end quote, since that government, quote, permitted certain activities which were not permitted by the United States government, i.e. experiments on anthrax, etc., end quote. Footnote 131. 3. The relationships between the intelligence community, agencies, and other agencies of the U.S. government. Certain U.S. government agencies actively assisted the efforts of intelligence agencies in this area. One form of assistance was to provide, quote, cover, end quote, for research contracts led by intelligence agencies, in order to disguise intelligence community interest in chemical and biological agents. Other forms of assistance raise more serious questions. Although the CIA's project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD was conducted by Bureau of Narcotics personnel, there was no open connection between the Bureau personnel and the agency. The Bureau was serving as a, quote, cutout, end quote, in order to make it difficult to trace agency participation. The cutout arrangement, however, reduced the CIA's ability to control the program. The agency could not control the process by which subjects were selected and cultivated, and could not regulate follow-up after the testing. Moreover, as the CIA's Inspector General noted, quote, the handling of test subjects in the last analysis rests with the Bureau of Narcotics agent working alone. Suppression of knowledge of critical results from the top CIA management is an inherent risk in these operations, end quote. Footnote 132. The arrangement also made it impossible for the agency to be certain that the decision to end the surreptitious administration of LSD would be honored by the Bureau personnel. The arrangement with the Bureau of Narcotics was described as, quote, informal, end quote. Footnote 133. The informality of the arrangement compounded the problem is aggravated by the fact that the 40 committee has had end of page 104, beginning of page 105. I'm not sure what this word is. One moment. Apparent unwillingness on the part of the Bureau's leadership to ask for details, and the CIA's hesitation in volunteering information. These problems raise serious questions of command and control within the Bureau. I'm going to return to page 104 to read the footnotes. Footnote 131. Artichoke Memorandum, June 13th, 52. Footnote 132. IG Report on MKUltra, 1963, page 14. Footnote 133. IBID. This was taken by one agency official to mean that there would be no written contract and no formal mechanism for payment. Elder, December 18th, 75, page 31. Resuming page 105. 4. Relationships between the intelligence community agencies and other institutions and individuals, public and private. The Inspector General's 1963 survey of MKULTRA noted that, quote, the research and development, end quote, phase was conducted through standing arrangements with, quote, specialists in universities, pharmaceutical houses, hospitals, state and federal institutions, and private research organizations, end quote, in a manner which concealed, quote, from the institution the interests of the CIA, end quote. Only a few, quote, key individuals, end quote, in each institution were, quote, made witting of agency sponsorship, end quote. The research and development phase was succeeded by a phase involving, quote, physicians, toxicologists, and other specialists in mental, narcotics, and general hospitals and prisons, who are provided the products and finding of basic research projects and proceed with intensive testing on human subjects, end quote. Footnote 134. According to the Inspector General, the MKUltra testing program were, quote, conducted under accepted scientific procedures, were health permits, test subjects are voluntary participants in the program, end quote. Footnote 135. This was clearly not true in the project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD, which was marked by a complete lack of screening, medical supervision, opportunity to observe, or medical or psychological follow-up. The intelligence agencies allowed individuals, researchers, The intelligence agencies allowed individual researchers to design their project. Experiments sponsored by these researchers, which included one where narcotics addicts were sent to Lexington, Kentucky, who were rewarded with the drug of their addiction in return for participation in experiments with LSD, call into question the decision by the agencies not to fix guidelines for the experiments. The MKUltra research and development program raises other questions as well. It is not clear whether individuals in prisons, mental, narcotics, and general hospitals can provide, quote, informed consent, end quote, to participation in experiments such as these. There is doubt as to whether institutions should be unwitting of the ultimate sponsor of research being done in their facilities. The nature of the arrangements also made it impossible for the individuals who were not aware of the sponsor of the research to exercise any choice about their participation based on the sponsoring organization. Although greater precautions are now being taken in research conducted on behalf of the intelligence community agencies, the dilemma of classification remains. These agencies obviously wish to conceal their interests in certain forms of research in order to avoid stimulating interest in the same areas by hostile governments. In some cases today, contractors or researchers wish to conceal their connection with these agencies Yet the fact of classification prevents open discussion and debate upon which scholarly work depends. Footnote 134. IBID, page 9. Footnote 135. IBID, page 10. The end of page 105, the beginning of page 106. Appendix B. Documents referring to the discovery of additional MKUltra material. 22nd June 1977. Memorandum for Deputy Director of Central Intelligence. Through Deputy Director for Science and Technology. Subject: Request for guidance on handling recently located MKUltra material. 1. U/AIUO. This memorandum is to advise you that additional MKUltra documents have been discovered and to obtain your approval for follow-on actions required. Paragraph 7 contains a recommended course of action. 2. UAIUO. As a result of John Mark's FOIA request F-76-374, all of the MKUltra material in OTS possession was reviewed for possible release to him. Following that review, the OTS material in the Retired Records Center was searched. It was during that latter search that the sub-project files were located among retired records of the OTS budget and fiscal section. These files were not discovered earlier, as the earlier searches were limited to the examination of the active and retired records of those branches considered most likely to have generated or have access to MKUltra documents. Those branches include chemistry, biology, behavioral activities, and contracts management. Because Dr. Gottlieb retrieved and destroyed all the MKUltra documents he was able to locate, it is not surprising that the earlier search for MKUltra documents directed at areas where they were most likely to be found. Was unsuccessful. The purpose of establishing the MKUltra mechanism was to limit knowledge of the sensitive work being performed to those with an absolute need to know. If those precepts had been followed, the recently found B and F files should have contained only financial and administrative documents. In retrospect, I realize that end of page 106, beginning of page 107. One moment. There's a stamp here as well that says declassified by not very legible number, and the date is the 29th of July, 1977. Now, returning to page 107. I'm going to start from the paragraph and then read the subject. A serious error was made in not having BNF files and other seemingly innocuous files searched earlier. And there's a bit of cutoff where it's difficult to read, so I'll try to read this. As has happened, most of the individual sub-project folders contain project proposals and memoranda for the record, which in varying degrees gives reasonably complete picture of the avenues of research funded through MKUltra. For your information, the original memorandum setting up MKUltra, signed by Mr. Dulles, is also among these documents. A copy of the memorandum is attached. And the subject for this page, just as to go back, read and read it. It says subject, request for guidance by on handling recently located MKUltra material. So, just a brief look. It looks like it may be repeated. I'll just skip over that. Next paragraph. 3. U/AIUO. At this writing, it does not appear that there is anything in these newly located files that would indicate the MKUltra activities were more extensive or more controversial than indicated by the Senate Select Church Committee report. If anything, the reverse is true, i.e., most of nearly 200, if I'm reading that correctly, it looks like 200, subprojects are involved. Thus, the overview of MKUltra is essentially unchanged. With two exceptions, the present find fills in some of the missing details. 4. One of these exceptions is the subproject number 45, which contains an activity that should have been reported earlier. That subproject details with the search for a knockout drug, which was I'm not sure what that word is. CONCOMITTANT. I'm not sure. It's difficult to read. But it is with and a... I don't know what this word is either. I can't read it very well. But it is, something of cancer research at a major university. It is believed that an objective reading of that project would demonstrate the search for knockout materials and anesthetics were compatible activities. However, the research proposal stated that, quote, chemical agents will be subjected to clinical screening on advanced cancer patients, end quote. 5. Subproject number 55 contains full details of CIA's contribution of $375,000 to the, and there's a set of words here, it seems, but it has been either scratched out or covered by a material. Most of the word has been censored, but the last two say building fund. The agency was then involved in drug research programs, many of which were being conducted by censored. The word or phrase is censored. I'm not saying that the word is literally censored. Sorry, it's covered, just letting you know. If you're watching on video, you'll see there's a big covering, whose facilities were inadequate. In order to facilitate the ongoing research programs, it was decided to expedite the building program by contributing to it through a mechanism that was also being used to fund some of the research projects. That is the end of page 107. This is the beginning of page 108. The contribution could be controversial in that it was made through a mechanism making it appear to be a private donation. Private donations qualified for and blotted out. I'll just say blotted out for censored terminology or words. Received an equal amount of federal matching funds. A letter from the Office of General Counsel dated 21st February 1951, attesting to the legality of this funding, is in the file. 6. The Legislative Council has been made aware of the existence of these additional MKUltra documents, which are still under review and sanitation. I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure if that's what it says. It's, as you can see, I'm not sure. But I will try to minimize my stopping and commentary. The Marks case is in litigation, and we are committed to advise Mr. Marks of the existence of these files shortly, and to deliver the releasable material to his attorneys by 31st of July. A letter from the Information and Privacy staff to Mr. Marks' attorneys, informing them of the existence of this material, is in the coordination process and is scheduled to be mailed on the 24 June. 7. There are now 2 actions that should be taken. A. Release appropriately sanitized material to Mr. Marks' attorneys as required by FOIA litigation. B. Inform the Senate Select Committee of the existence of the recently located records prior to informing Mr. Marks' attorneys. It is recommended that you approve of both of these actions. 8. If additional details on the contents of this material are desired, the OTS officers most familiar with it are prepared to brief you at your convenience. And there's a signature. David S. Brandwein. BRANDWEIN. Director, Office of Technical Service. End of page 108, beginning of page 109. At the top it says Director of Central Intelligence, Washington, D.C. 20505. The Honorable Daniel K. Inouye, Chairman, Select Committee on Intelligence, United States Senate, Washington, D.C., zip code 20510. Dear Mr. Chairman, during the course of 1975, when the Select Committee chaired by Senator Church was investigating intelligence activities, the CIA was asked to produce documentation on a program of experimentation with the effects of drugs. Under this project conducted from 1953 to 1964 and known as, quote, MKUltra, end quote, tests were conducted on American citizens in some cases without their knowledge. The CIA, after searching for such documentation, reported that most of the documents on this matter may have been destroyed. I find it my duty to report to you now that our continuing search for drug-related, as well as other documents, has uncovered certain papers which bear on this matter. Let me hasten to add that I am persuaded that there was no previous attempt to conceal this material in the original 1975 exploration. The material recently discovered was in the retired archives filed under financial accounts and only uncovered by using extraordinary and extensive search efforts. In this connection, incidentally, I have personally commended the employee whose diligence produced this find. Because the new material, now on hand, is primarily of financial nature, it does not present a complete picture of the field of drug experimentation activity, but it does provide more detail than was previously available to us. For example, the following types of activities were undertaken. A. Possible additional cases of drugs being tested on American citizens without their knowledge. B. Research was undertaken on surreptitious methods of administering drugs. C. Some of the persons chosen for experimentation were drug addicts or alcoholics. D. Research into the development of a knockout or K drug was performed in conjunction with being done to develop painkillers for advanced cancer patients, and tests on such patients were carried out. End of page 109, beginning of page 110. E. There is a possibility of an improper payment to a private institution. The drug-related activities described in this newly located material began almost 25 years ago. I assure you they were discontinued over 10 years ago and do not take place today. In keeping with the President's commitment to disclose any errors of the intelligence community which are uncovered, I would like to volunteer to testify before your committee on the full details of this unfortunate series of events. I am in the process of reading the fairly voluminous material involving, and do want to be certain that I have a complete picture when I talk with the committee. I will be in touch with you next week to discuss when hearings might be scheduled at the earliest opportunity. I regret having to bring this issue to your attention, but I know that it is essential to your oversight procedures that you might be kept fully informed in a timely manner. Yours sincerely, Stansfield Turner. End of page 110, beginning of page 111. Appendix C. Documents referring to subprojects. Date, 6 June 1977. Draft, 1st May 1953. Memorandum for the record. Subject, Project MKUltra, Subproject 2. 1. Subproject 2 is being set up to provide a secure and efficient means to exploit blotted out in regard to the MKUltra program. 2. Blotted out is a practicing psychiatrist in Blotted Out and a faculty member of the Blotted Out. His past positions have included chief neuropsychiatrist at Blotted Out, chief of the psychiatric section at Blotted Out, and OSS experience during World War II. He has been of value in the general MKUltra field as an overall advisor and consultant. He has been of value in contacting individuals in the Blotted Out area and in setting up projects there, and he has done work himself which has contributed to the MKUltra field. His professional activities and known connections with the Blotted Out. 3. Subproject 2 would include A. Miscellaneous research and testing services in the general field of MKUltra. B. Services as a contact and cutout for projects in the MKUltra field, primarily those located in the Blotted Out areas. C. Monitoring of select projects in the MKUltra field when located in the central Blotted Out area. D. Services as a general consultant and advisor to in the MKUltra field. 4. The total cost of this project is not to exceed $4,650 for a period of 1 year. 5. Blotted out is cleared through top security on a contact basis. And then there is several things that are blotted out in the bottom section. And to the right you have Chemical Division / PSS. To the left you have date, looks like a 5. I don't know what month that is because maybe June, might be June, and you have 1977. And then on the right again you have approved. And then that's the end of page 111, the beginning of page 112. So from the middle to the left-hand side you have blotted out information, and then you have the date, the 6th June 1977. Moving over to the right you have approved. You have number 2-56. Underneath you have a signature, Chief Chemical Division TSS. Going back to go a bit down to the left, program approved and recommended, blotted out, for research, chairman, date May 5th, 1953, attachment proposal, looks like it's blank. Going from left to right, you have approved for obligation of funds, blotted out, research director, date, you have something written there, I can't read cursive at the moment. Original only, you have on the left hand corner underneath the attachment and proposal. And on the bottom you have from left to the middle blotted out information, and then you have the date 6th June 1977, and this is page 2 of this part of the document. And that is the end of page 112. This is the beginning of page 113. From the middle to the left-hand corner of the top of the page, you have blotted out information. You have the date 6th June 1977. Starting from the middle, proposal. Objective: to study the possible synergistic action of drugs which may be appropriate for use in abolishing consciousness. Situation: there is reason to believe that 2 or more drugs used in combination are more effective than single drugs. The combined effect of some drugs, such as combinations of barbiturates, are known. With other combinations, the degree of synergism is not known. If considerable synergism is found to exist, 2 possibilities must be considered. 1. That a particularly useful combination may be found, and 2. That a particular combination may be hazardous because of its effect on respiration or some other vital function. To minimize hazards, animal experiments should precede human experiments. Proposal: allocation of $1,000 for animal experiments to be drawn on as needed. That experiments be conducted informally at blotted out, without a specific grant, and with appropriate cover. Now toward the end of the page, bottom of the page, you have a big chunk of information blotted out, and then you have to the left hand side you have a couple of lines blotted out, and then you have something in the middle that's blotted out. And that's the end of page 113, beginning of page 114. Blotted out information on the top left hand corner under the page for this document, which is, it says 112, but anyways. Date It might be a 6, it might be an 8. I'm just going to say 6 June 1977. Proposal. Objective. To study methods for administration of drugs without the knowledge of the patient. Preparation of a manual. Method. A study of methods which have been used by criminals for surreptitious administration of drugs. Analysis of psychodynamics of situations of this nature. Proposal that $1,000 be allocated for this purpose. Funds to be requested as needed. Scrolling down, you have a chunk of information that's blotted out toward, you say, from the right hand side largely toward part of the middle. And then you scroll down a bit more, some information toward the lower left hand part, a few lines, and then you have the date, which may say June 6th or 6 June 1977, but part of that's blotted out as well. End of page 114, beginning of page 115. And I'm actually just going to stop here for today. And I intend to resume this in the next recording.